Solomon Kearney was on his knees on the scorching asphalt of a gas station parking lot in the middle of the afternoon. 5 police officers surrounded him in a tight half-circle. One pressed a knee into his back hard enough to pin him forward. Another stood over him, screaming about respect, about compliance, about learning how things work in this town. Solomon's hands were locked behind his head, his fingers laced together. His heart was steady. His breathing was even. His eyes were clear and focused, moving from face to face, recording every detail. Because Solomon knew something these 5 officers did not. In exactly 48 hours, every single one of them would stand before his desk, pleading for their careers. And he would remember every word they were saying right now. 6 hours before his knees hit that parking lot asphalt, Solomon Kearney was driving a rented silver sedan across the state line into Granton. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2 as he passed through stretches of pine forest and farmland, the afternoon sun throwing long shadows across the cracked pavement. He had the windows down because the air conditioning in the rental was barely functioning, and the August heat pressed against him like a warm hand on his chest. He was 42 years old, clean-shaven, with deep brown skin and close-cropped hair showing the first traces of silver at the temples. His build was solid, but not imposing, the kind of frame that came from years of discipline rather than vanity. He wore khaki pants, a navy blue polo shirt, and a pair of dark sunglasses pushed up onto his forehead. No badge on his belt, no uniform hanging in the back seat, no department vehicle with exempt plates and a radio crackling on the dashboard. To anyone passing him on that highway, Solomon Kearney looked like any other black man driving through the American South on a Tuesday afternoon. That appearance, ordinary and anonymous, was about to become the most dangerous thing about him. Solomon had spent 20 years in law enforcement. He joined the Charlotte Police Department at 22, worked patrol for 3 years, made detective at 25, and spent the next decade and a half building a reputation that people in the department described with one word: incorruptible. He cleared homicide cases that other detectives had abandoned. He earned commendations for bravery during a hostage situation in an elementary school where he talked an armed man into surrendering without a single shot fired. He mentored young officers. He built trust in communities that had every reason to distrust the badge. But the thing that defined Solomon Kearney, the engine that drove him through every long night and every impossible case, was not ambition. It was memory. When Solomon was 17 years old, his older brother Isaiah was killed by a police officer during a routine traffic stop in Charlotte. Isaiah was 20. He was driving home from his overnight shift at a warehouse. The officer pulled him over for a broken taillight. Within 90 seconds, Isaiah Kearney was on the ground with 3 bullets in his body. The officer claimed Isaiah reached for something under the seat. The investigation found nothing. No weapon, no contraband, nothing in his hands, nothing anywhere. The officer was placed on administrative leave for 4 months and then returned to full duty. No charges were filed. No apology was offered. No explanation was given that could make sense of a 20-year-old man dying on the shoulder of a road 7 minutes from his mother's house because a taillight was out. That night split Solomon's life into before and after. Before, he was a kid who wanted to study architecture. After, he was a young man with a purpose so clear it burned like a brand on his chest. He would enter the system that killed his brother, and he would change it from within. Not with speeches, not with protests, with rank, with authority, with the kind of power that could fire a corrupt officer and make it stick. 20 years later, that purpose brought him to Granton. The city had been under federal scrutiny for 18 months. The previous police captain, a man named Lloyd Stegall, was forced to retire after the Department of Justice opened a pattern and practice investigation into the Granton Police Department. The allegations were severe: racial profiling, excessive force against black residents, a complaint system that buried every grievance filed by a person of color. The city council, desperate to avoid a federal consent decree that would strip them of control over their own department, launched a national search for a new captain. Someone from outside. Someone with clean credentials and a track record that could survive scrutiny. Chief Harold Oakes found Solomon. He flew to Charlotte twice to recruit him personally. He described Granton with the careful honesty of a man who knows his city's ugliness and wants it fixed, but does not fully understand how deep the rot goes. Solomon's wife, Camille, a civil rights attorney who had spent her career fighting exactly these kinds of departments, supported the move. But she gave him a warning the night before they packed the house. She told Solomon that departments like Granton do not just resist change. They do not simply push back. They fight it with everything they have, and the weapons they use are not always visible. Solomon promised her he would be careful. Now, driving through Granton for the first time, he saw what the federal complaint file could not fully convey. He passed through the East Side, the predominantly black neighborhoods that had been the epicenter of every complaint, every lawsuit, every incident report. The houses were small and tired, with chain-link fences and patchy lawns. A group of boys played basketball on a half-court with a bent rim. An old woman sat on her porch, and as a patrol car rolled slowly past, Solomon watched her pull her grandson closer to her body with a protective arm, her eyes tracking the cruiser until it disappeared around the corner. Solomon felt the weight of that gesture. He understood it. He had lived it. He needed fuel before heading to the station for his orientation meeting with Chief Oakes. His GPS directed him to a gas station on the east side, a small place with 2 pumps and a convenience store with iron bars on the windows. He pulled in, parked near the entrance, and walked inside. The clerk behind the counter, a white woman in her 50s with reading glasses hanging on a chain around her neck, looked up when the electronic chime announced his entrance. Her eyes followed him from the door to the refrigerator case. She watched him select a bottle of water. She watched him pick up a pack of gum from the rack near the register. She watched him walk to the counter and place both items down and pay with a $20 bill. Solomon noticed all of it. He said thank you, collected his change, nodded politely, and walked back outside into the afternoon heat. He did not know that the clerk had already made a phone call. He did not know that the blue and white patrol car pulling into the lot behind his rental was not there by coincidence. He did not know that the next 15 minutes would change everything. As Solomon stepped onto the cracked concrete of the parking lot, he saw a patrol car slide in behind his rental sedan, angling across the space so that his vehicle was completely blocked. Then a second patrol car appeared from the opposite direction, pulling in from the street entrance and parking nose first beside the gas pumps. Then a third, rolling in slowly from the side access road. 5 officers stepped out of the 3 vehicles in a formation that was clearly coordinated. They moved with the confidence of men who had done this many times before. And the one walking toward Solomon at the front, thick-necked and broad-shouldered with mirrored sunglasses and a hand already resting on the grip of his holstered weapon, was a man whose name Solomon had read dozens of times in the federal complaint file he studied before accepting this position. It was Sergeant Garrett Lockhart, 15-year veteran, 37 formal complaints, 0 sustained findings, and he was heading straight for Solomon with purpose in his stride. Lockhart stopped 4 feet in front of Solomon and spread his boots wide on the pavement. He was 2 inches taller than Solomon and 40 pounds heavier, the kind of man who used his size the way other people used their voices, filling the space around him until everyone nearby felt smaller. His mirrored sunglasses reflected Solomon's face back at him in twin distortions. Behind Lockhart, the other 4 officers fanned out with practiced precision. Officer Travis Fenwick, lean and sharp, featured with a permanent squint and a chin that jutted forward like a challenge, moved to Solomon's left. Officer Brett Dempsey, who was built like a defensive lineman and carried himself with the easy menace of a man who enjoyed intimidation, circled to Solomon's right. Officer Colton Sharp, the youngest of the group at 25, with a boyish face that did not match the tension in his shoulders, moved behind Solomon to cut off any path of retreat. Officer Clayton Peck, quiet and watchful with flat gray eyes, positioned himself near the patrol cars where he could observe everything without participating directly. Solomon recognized the geometry immediately. This was a containment formation. It was designed to isolate, surround, and control. He had taught it himself during training seminars in Charlotte. The difference was that Solomon taught it for use against armed and dangerous suspects with active warrants. These men were using it against a man holding a bottle of water and a pack of gum. Lockhart spoke first. He said he needed to see some identification. He said Solomon matched the description of a suspect wanted in connection with an armed robbery that had occurred at a convenience store on the north side of Granton earlier that morning. He said it casually, as if the accusation were a formality rather than an act of aggression. Solomon kept his hands visible. He moved slowly. He told Lockhart, in a calm and measured voice, that he was reaching into his back pocket for his wallet. He pulled it out, opened it, and extended his North Carolina driver's license between 2 fingers. Lockhart took it with a snap of his wrist. He examined the card for no more than 2 seconds, then dropped it. The license landed face down on the hot asphalt between Solomon's feet. Lockhart said the license could be forged. He said he had seen plenty of fakes come through his jurisdiction. He said a lot of people carry identification that does not belong to them. Solomon looked down at his license on the ground. He did not bend to pick it up. Not yet. He understood that bending down was exactly what Lockhart wanted, because a man reaching toward the ground near a police officer's feet creates an opportunity. An opportunity to shout a command. An opportunity to escalate. Solomon had read about this tactic in 11 separate complaint files. He told Lockhart, clearly and without hesitation, that he was a law enforcement officer. He said he was a 20-year veteran of the Charlotte Police Department. He offered to provide his badge number, his commanding officer's name, and a direct phone number to verify his identity. Lockhart's mouth twisted into something between a smile and a sneer. He told Solomon that every criminal he had ever arrested claimed to be somebody important. He said one man told him he was a senator. Another said he was an FBI agent. Dempsey, standing to Solomon's right, let out a short laugh and added that he once cuffed a man who swore he was the governor of North Carolina. The officers shared the joke while Solomon stood motionless in the center of their circle. Solomon spoke again. His voice remained even. He asked Lockhart to contact Chief Harold Oakes at the Granton Police Department. He said Chief Oakes could confirm his identity within 30 seconds. Lockhart's face did not change. He did not reach for his radio. He did not acknowledge the request at all. Instead, he turned his head slightly and gave Fenwick a small nod. Fenwick walked to Solomon's rental car and opened the driver's side door without asking permission, without presenting a warrant, without stating probable cause. He leaned inside and began searching the vehicle. He opened the glove box and pulled out the rental agreement. He checked under the seats. He popped the trunk release. Solomon watched the illegal search unfold with the disciplined stillness of a man who understood that his restraint in this moment was more powerful than any resistance could be. Then Fenwick's voice cut across the parking lot from behind the open trunk. He called out that he had found something. He was holding a locked black case. He opened it and held up the contents for Lockhart to see. It was Solomon's service weapon, a department-issued 9mm handgun, stored in a locked container exactly as transportation regulations required for off-duty officers traveling across state lines. Lockhart's posture changed instantly. The casual mockery drained from his face and was replaced by something harder and more aggressive. He turned back to Solomon and said they now had an armed suspect. He said the situation had just changed. He placed his hand on the grip of his holster and told Solomon to get on the ground. Right now. On his knees, hands behind his head. Solomon looked at Lockhart for a long 3 seconds. Then he lowered himself, slowly and deliberately, onto the hot asphalt. The pavement burned through the fabric of his khaki pants. He laced his fingers behind his head. He could feel the heat radiating upward through his kneecaps. But his mind was not on the pain. His mind was processing everything with the precision of a detective at a crime scene, because that is exactly what this was. As Solomon knelt on that asphalt, he recognized what was happening around him with absolute clarity. Not just the behavior, the script. The robbery suspect excuse with no physical description provided and no suspect bulletin referenced. The refusal to verify identification through dispatch or any official channel. The illegal search of his vehicle without consent, without a warrant, and without articulable probable cause. He had read about this exact sequence in the federal complaint file. 18 separate black men had filed formal complaints over the span of 10 years, and every single one of them described the same series of events in nearly the same words. The same manufactured justification. The same refusal to confirm identity. The same escalation to a vehicle search. The same discovery of something, anything, that could justify further detention. Lockhart had been running this identical operation for a decade. And now Solomon was not just a victim inside this pattern. He was a witness. He was a trained law enforcement professional with 20 years of experience who was experiencing firsthand the exact civil rights violations documented in a federal investigation. And he was the one person in the world with both the authority and the jurisdiction to do something about it. Every word spoken to him, every action taken against him, every procedural violation committed in this parking lot was evidence. And Solomon was collecting all of it. On his knees with the afternoon sun bearing down on his neck and the asphalt sending waves of heat through his body, Solomon tried once more. He spoke with the deliberate clarity of a man who knows his words are being recorded by his own memory, if nothing else. He stated his full legal name. He stated his rank. He stated the department he had served for 2 decades. He stated that he was in Granton under official appointment and that his credentials could be verified with a single phone call. Lockhart cut him off mid-sentence. He told Solomon to stop talking. He said the time for talking was over. Then Dempsey moved behind Solomon and grabbed both of his arms, wrenching them downward from behind his head and pulling them together at the small of his back. The motion was rough and practiced, the kind of movement that comes from doing the same thing to hundreds of people who could not fight back. Fenwick stepped in with the handcuffs. The metal closed around Solomon's wrists with 2 sharp clicks, one on each side, ratcheted tight enough that Solomon could feel his pulse pressing against the steel. The edges bit into the bones of his wrists. He did not wince. He did not cry out. He kept his face neutral, his breathing controlled, his body still. But inside, in the place where Solomon kept the memory of his brother Isaiah lying on the shoulder of a Charlotte road at 20 years old, something was burning. Not rage, something more focused than rage, something patient. A crowd had started to form. 3 people stood near the convenience store entrance. A man pumping gas at the far island had stopped and was watching openly. A woman in a parked minivan had lowered her window and was holding her phone, though it was unclear whether she was recording or simply watching. Then the store's front door opened and an elderly black woman stepped out onto the sidewalk. Her name was Opal. She was 71 years old with white hair pinned beneath a blue headscarf, and she had lived in this neighborhood for 43 years. She had watched from inside the store as the officers surrounded Solomon, as they dropped his identification on the ground, as they searched his car, as they put him on his knees. And she had seen enough. Her voice cut across the parking lot like a bell. She shouted that she had been watching through the window the entire time. She shouted that this man had done absolutely nothing wrong. She said he walked in, bought a water and some gum, paid cash, said thank you, and walked out. She said she would testify to that in any courtroom in this state. Lockhart turned on her. He crossed the distance between them in 4 strides and pointed his finger directly at her face. He told her that if she did not go back inside the store immediately, she would be arrested for obstruction of justice. He told her this was official police business and that civilians who interfered would face charges. Opal held her ground. She stood on that sidewalk with her chin raised and her eyes burning with the accumulated fury of a lifetime spent watching scenes exactly like this one play out in her neighborhood, on her streets, against her people. She held that ground for 5 full seconds, staring directly into Lockhart's mirrored sunglasses. Then another customer, a younger woman standing behind her, gently took Opal's arm and guided her back inside the store. Opal went, but she turned her head and kept her eyes locked on Solomon until the glass door closed between them. Across the street, in the parking lot of a laundromat, a 16-year-old boy named Jaden Stokes was sitting on the hood of his mother's car, waiting for the dryer cycle to finish. He had watched the patrol cars arrive. He had watched the officers surround the man at the gas station. And now he raised his phone and began recording. His hands were steady. The camera was focused. He captured everything. Officer Sharp noticed the phone within 30 seconds. He walked across the street toward Jaden with a slow, deliberate stride designed to intimidate. He told Jaden to put the phone away. He said recording an active police operation was a crime. It was not a crime. Jaden knew that. Every kid in this neighborhood knew their rights when it came to filming police, because the community had made sure of it. Jaden took 3 steps backward, but did not lower his phone. Sharp stared at him for a moment, weighing his options, then turned and walked back to the gas station without pressing further. But he told Jaden, loud enough for the boy to hear clearly, that he was making a mistake he would regret. Back at the gas station, Lockhart pulled Solomon to his feet by the chain of the handcuffs, sending a sharp pain through both of Solomon's shoulders. He walked Solomon across the parking lot toward the waiting patrol car. They moved slowly, publicly, in full view of every person watching. And as they walked, Lockhart leaned in close to Solomon's right ear. His voice dropped to a whisper that no one else in the parking lot could hear. What Lockhart said in that whisper was not a warning. It was not a procedural statement. It was a declaration. He told Solomon that this is how things work in Granton. He said that people who look like Solomon need to understand where they stand. And then he used a word. A single word. A word that carries 400 years of violence and dehumanization compressed into 2 syllables. He said it quietly, almost casually. The way a man says something he has said so many times, it no longer feels like a weapon to him, even though it is. Solomon absorbed the word without a flicker of visible reaction. His face remained stone. His eyes remained forward, but his memory captured it with the precision of a court stenographer. Every syllable, every inflection. The exact distance between Lockhart's mouth and his ear, the smell of coffee and tobacco on Lockhart's breath, all of it recorded, filed, and preserved. They placed Solomon in the back seat of Lockhart's patrol car. The door closed with a heavy thud. The interior smelled like vinyl cleaner and sweat. Solomon's hands throbbed behind his back where the cuffs pressed against his spine. Dempsey and Fenwick walked to the second patrol car. Sharp and Peck took the third. As the small convoy prepared to pull out of the gas station, Solomon's phone, which Fenwick had confiscated and placed in a clear plastic evidence bag on the passenger seat of Lockhart's cruiser, began to ring. The screen lit up through the plastic. The caller ID was clearly visible from where Lockhart sat behind the wheel. It read, Chief Oakes. Lockhart glanced at the phone. He looked at the name on the screen. Then he reached over, pressed the side button to silence the call, and pulled the car out of the parking lot without a word. The convoy turned left onto the main road and headed toward the station. They passed a Baptist church with a sign advertising Sunday services. They passed a row of small businesses with hand-painted signs and metal security gates. They passed through an intersection where the light turned yellow and Lockhart accelerated through it. And there, on the right side of the road, rising above the tree line on a steel frame bolted to concrete, was a billboard. It was brand new. The colors were vivid and sharp, printed within the last week. It featured a large professional photograph of a black man in a crisp navy blue dress uniform, his captain's badge catching the studio light, his expression composed and authoritative. Beside the photograph was the official emblem of the Granton Police Department. The text across the bottom of the billboard read in bold white letters against a dark blue background. Granton welcomes Captain Solomon Kearney. A new era of community policing. The billboard was 30 feet tall and 15 feet wide. It faced directly toward every vehicle traveling on this road. It was impossible to miss, and Lockhart drove directly beneath it, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Without a single glance upward, the face on that billboard and the face in his back seat belonged to the same man, and he had absolutely no idea. They arrived at the Granton Police Department headquarters 12 minutes later. The building was a two-story brick structure built in the 1970s, with narrow windows and a flagpole out front, where the American flag hung limp in the windless heat. Lockhart parked in the front lot, not in the rear booking area where detained individuals were normally brought in through a side entrance away from public view. He chose the front deliberately. He wanted to walk Solomon through the main doors. He wanted every officer inside to see him bring in a suspect. He wanted an audience. It was a performance. And Lockhart was a man who had been performing this particular role for 15 years. He opened the back door of the patrol car and pulled Solomon out by the arm, steadying him as Solomon found his footing on the pavement, with his hands still cuffed behind his back. Fenwick and Dempsey flanked them. Sharp and Peck followed. The 5 officers and their prisoner walked through the glass double doors of the main entrance and into the fluorescent-lit lobby of the station. The front desk sergeant, a heavy-set woman with a phone pressed to her ear, looked up and her eyebrows rose. 2 officers standing near the water cooler stopped their conversation. A civilian clerk carrying a stack of folders paused mid-stride. Lockhart's voice filled the lobby. He announced that they had apprehended an armed suspect during a routine stop on the east side. He said the suspect was carrying an unregistered firearm. He said the suspect had refused to provide valid identification and had become verbally combative with officers. Every word was a lie. Every word was delivered with the practiced confidence of a man who had never been challenged on a lie in this building. They moved through the lobby and into the main corridor that connected the public area to the administrative offices and squad room at the rear of the building. Lockhart walked at the front with Solomon beside him, guiding him by the elbow. Officers stepped aside to let them pass. Some watched with curiosity. Others watched with the dull familiarity of people who had seen this procession before and knew exactly what it was. They turned the corner into the main administrative hallway, the long straight corridor that ran past the records room, the conference room, and terminated at the captain's office at the far end. And there, standing in a loose group near the open door of that office, was Chief Harold Oakes. He was 58 years old, tall and thin with a gray mustache and the careful posture of a man who had spent decades trying to hold a department together with both hands. Beside him stood two members of the Granton City Council who had come to the station to formally welcome the new captain on his first day. One of them was holding a navy blue folder. Inside that folder were Solomon Kearney's badge, his official credentials, and his signed appointment letter. Oakes saw them first. He saw Lockhart walking toward him. He saw the man in handcuffs beside Lockhart. And then he saw the face of the man in handcuffs. The transformation that occurred on Chief Harold Oakes's face in the next 3 seconds was something that every person standing in that hallway would remember for the rest of their lives. The color left his skin from the forehead down, draining away like water from a sink. His mouth opened. No sound came out. His eyes went wide and then wider, and the folder he was holding slipped 2 inches in his grip before he caught it. Then the sound came. And it was not a request. It was not a question. It was an eruption. Oakes shouted at Lockhart to remove the handcuffs immediately. His voice hit the walls of the corridor and echoed back from both ends. Lockhart stopped walking. His hand was still on Solomon's elbow. His face registered confusion, then irritation, then something that was not yet fear, but was moving in that direction. He started to speak, started to explain about the suspect and the firearm, but Oakes cut him off with a second shout that was louder than the first. He said to take the handcuffs off right now. He said it in a voice that left no room for interpretation or delay. Lockhart looked at Oakes. He looked at the 2 council members. He looked back at Solomon. And for the first time, something flickered behind Lockhart's mirrored sunglasses. Fenwick removed the handcuffs. The metal came away from Solomon's wrists, leaving deep red indentations that would take hours to fade. Solomon brought his arms forward slowly and rubbed his wrists with steady hands. Oakes stepped forward and turned to face the hallway. Every officer within earshot was now watching. The 2 from the water cooler. The desk sergeant who had left her post and followed them down the corridor. 4 more who had emerged from the squad room. Oakes spoke clearly and formally. He introduced the man standing before them as Captain Solomon Kearney, 20-year veteran of the Charlotte Police Department, newly appointed captain of the Granton Police Department, effective immediately. He said that Captain Kearney was the commanding officer of every sworn officer in this building, and that his authority was absolute and immediate. The silence that followed was so complete that Solomon could hear the air conditioning unit cycling in the ceiling above him. Sharp turned white. He backed up until his shoulders pressed flat against the corridor wall, and he stayed there, motionless, as if the wall could somehow protect him from what was about to happen. Dempsey's hands began to tremble at his sides. The big man who had wrenched Solomon's arms behind his back and clamped on the handcuffs with practiced force now could not keep his own fingers still. Fenwick looked at Lockhart with the desperate, searching expression of a man who has always followed orders and suddenly has no orders to follow. And Peck, the quiet one, the watcher, fixed his eyes on a single point on the linoleum floor and did not blink. Lockhart stood in the center of the hallway, with his jaw clenched so tightly that a vein pulsed visibly on his left temple. His hands were rigid at his sides. His chest expanded and contracted with controlled breaths that were not quite fast enough to be called panic, but were far too fast for calm. Solomon looked at each of the 5 officers in turn. He held eye contact with each man long enough that each one was forced to look away. Sharp first, then Fenwick, then Peck, then Dempsey. Lockhart lasted the longest, but even he eventually dropped his gaze to the floor. Then Solomon turned to Chief Oakes. He thanked him. He accepted his badge, his credentials, and his appointment letter from the navy blue folder. He pinned the captain's badge to his belt and held the appointment letter in his left hand. He said he was ready to begin. Then he issued his first official order. All 5 officers involved in the gas station incident were to report to his office at 0800 the following morning. No exceptions. No representatives. No union counsel for the initial meeting. 0800 sharp. Solomon walked into his new office alone and closed the door behind him. The room was modest. A wooden desk, a leather chair, 2 filing cabinets, an American flag standing in the corner, and a window that looked out onto the parking lot. On the desk, perfectly centered on the blotter, was a plain white envelope. Solomon picked it up. It was sealed. No name on the outside. No department stamp. He opened it and withdrew a single sheet of white paper. Typed in the center, in plain black font, were 2 sentences. You are not welcome here. Leave while you can. There was no signature, no date, no identifying marks. Solomon held the paper up to the window light and examined it carefully. No watermark from department letterhead, no fingerprints visible to the naked eye. He placed the note back in the envelope and set it aside. But here is what mattered. This note was placed on his desk before the gas station incident. Before anyone in this building knew what Lockhart had done. Before the handcuffs, before the humiliation, before any of it. This note was placed on his desk at some point during the day, in an office that should have been secured, by someone who had access to this part of the building. The threat was not a reaction to the confrontation. Someone in this department had been planning against Solomon Kearney from the moment his appointment was announced. The enemy inside these walls was not just Garrett Lockhart. It went deeper than that. At exactly 8 o'clock the following morning, 5 officers stood in a line across from Solomon's desk. He had arrived at 6:30, 2 hours early, and spent the time reviewing personnel files, memorizing service records, and arranging the room so that his desk sat directly in front of the window, which meant the morning light would be behind him and in the eyes of anyone seated or standing on the other side. It was a small tactical advantage, but Solomon had learned long ago that interrogation is built from small advantages. He sat in full uniform for the first time. The navy blue fabric was pressed to a razor crease. The captain's badge on his chest caught the light from the window. His nameplate was polished. His service ribbons were aligned. He looked like what he was, the highest-ranking officer in this building. He did not raise his voice. He did not stand. He did not gesture. He simply began. He recounted the events of the previous afternoon at the gas station in meticulous surgical detail. He described the arrival of the 3 patrol cars and the positions each officer assumed around him. He quoted the fabricated armed robbery justification that Lockhart used to initiate the stop. He described the illegal search of his vehicle conducted without consent without a warrant, and without any articulable probable cause. He described the confiscation of his lawfully stored service weapon. He described the application of handcuffs. He described the decision to transport him through the main entrance of the station rather than the rear booking entrance, noting that this choice served no procedural purpose and was designed solely for public humiliation. He described every statement made to him, and he paused after each one to ask the officer who made it whether his recollection was accurate. Sharp was first to respond. He nodded immediately, his eyes fixed on the floor. His voice was barely above a whisper when he said yes. Peck gave a quiet, clipped affirmative. Fenwick hesitated for several seconds, shifting his weight from one foot to the other, before confirming that the account was, as he put it, generally accurate. Dempsey said he did not recall certain specific details. He said the situation was intense, and his memory of the exact sequence was unclear. Solomon noted the response without comment. Lockhart said nothing. He stood at the center of the line with his arms folded across his chest and his chin slightly raised. He stared at Solomon with an expression of undisguised contempt, as if the uniform and the badge and the desk meant nothing, as if rank was a costume and authority was a game that could be won by whoever refused to blink first. Solomon informed all 5 officers that they were placed under internal review, effective immediately. He assigned each of them to administrative desk duty pending the outcome of the investigation. He stated that their patrol assignments, their vehicle privileges, and their field authority were suspended until further notice. Lockhart broke his silence. He accused Solomon of retaliation. He called the review a personal vendetta driven by ego and resentment. He said he would contact the police union within the hour and file a formal grievance. He said the union would shut this down before the end of the day. Solomon replied that he was following standard departmental protocol for allegations of unlawful detention, illegal search, and civil rights violations. He said the union was welcome to review the procedures and would find that every step he had taken was consistent with both department policy and federal guidelines. He told Lockhart that the union's involvement would be noted in the file, but would not alter the timeline of the review. Then he dismissed them. After the 5 officers filed out and the door closed behind them, Solomon opened the bottom drawer of his desk and pulled out the federal complaint file he had brought from Charlotte. It was 3 inches thick. He had read it twice before accepting the position, but now, with the physical memory of handcuffs still faintly etched into his wrists, he read it differently. He was no longer reading about strangers. He was reading about himself. He pulled the department's internal complaint records from the filing cabinet against the wall. What he discovered was staggering in its scale. Over the past 10 years, the Granton Police Department had received 347 formal complaints from residents. Of those, 289 were filed by black citizens. The allegations included harassment, racial profiling, illegal stops and searches, excessive force, verbal abuse, false arrests, and destruction of personal property. Of those 289 complaints, exactly 4 had resulted in any disciplinary action. 4. The remaining 285 were dismissed with nearly identical one-line notations written by the previous captain. Complaint unfounded. Investigation closed. The pattern was overwhelming. Solomon cross-referenced the complaints with officer names and found that a core group of 12 officers accounted for over 70% of all complaints filed. At the center of that group, appearing more frequently than any other name, was Sergeant Garrett Lockhart. That afternoon, Solomon arranged a private meeting with Lieutenant Nora Hendry from Internal Affairs. Nora was 38, a black woman who had served in the department for 11 years. one of only 3 black officers on the entire force. She arrived at his office with a locked briefcase and a guarded expression. Solomon asked her directly whether she had been investigating the complaint patterns. Nora studied him for a long moment before answering. Then she told him everything. She said she had been trying to build a case against Lockhart and his circle for 3 years. She had gathered evidence on her own time, conducted interviews outside of working hours, and compiled documentation that she kept on a personal laptop that never connected to the department's network. Every time she attempted to open a formal investigation through proper channels, she was blocked. The previous captain refused to authorize subpoenas. The union filed harassment complaints against her. She was transferred twice to positions with less access and less authority. She was warned by colleagues who feared for her safety that she was making powerful enemies, but she never stopped. She pulled a flash drive from the briefcase and handed it to Solomon. On that drive was a file containing 2 years of witness statements, photographs documenting injuries sustained during arrests, medical records obtained with victim consent, and a detailed timeline linking specific officers to specific incidents. Solomon plugged the drive into his computer and opened the file. He scrolled through it slowly, reading each document, studying each photograph, and then he reached one that stopped him completely. It was a photograph taken 8 years ago. It showed a young black man, approximately 30 years old at the time, sitting in a holding cell. His left eye was swollen shut. His lip was split open. Dark bruises covered the right side of his jaw and his neck. His name, according to the file, was Darren Rucker. The arresting officer was Sergeant Garrett Lockhart. 2 witnesses stated that Lockhart struck Rucker repeatedly during the arrest, but that was not what made Solomon's hands go still on the keyboard. It was the incident report attached to the arrest. The justification Lockhart wrote for initiating the stop on Darren Rucker was nearly identical to what Lockhart said to Solomon at the gas station. The same armed robbery suspect story. The same claim that the individual matched a vague description. The same refusal to verify identification. The same manufactured escalation. Word for word, almost perfectly identical. Lockhart had been using this playbook for at least 8 years. The same lie. The same script. Targeting black men with the same fabricated justification. And until yesterday, no one with the authority to stop him had ever experienced it firsthand. Solomon drove to the east side of Granton on his second morning in the city. He parked his personal car, a dark blue sedan he and Camille had driven from Charlotte, 2 blocks from the address listed in Nora Hendry's file. He wore plain clothes again, this time by choice. Khaki pants, a button-down shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms, no badge visible. He walked past a liquor store with a hand-painted sign, past a church with a marquee advertising a food drive, and stopped in front of a small brick building with a red and white striped pole mounted beside the door. The sign above the entrance read, Rucker's Barber Shop, and the letters were faded from years of sun and rain. Solomon pushed open the door and stepped inside. The shop was warm and smelled of aftershave and hot combs. There were 3 barber chairs along the right wall, 2 of them occupied. A television mounted high in the corner played a daytime talk show with the volume turned low. 2 men sat in plastic chairs along the left wall, waiting. All conversation stopped the instant Solomon crossed the threshold. Every set of eyes in the room landed on him and stayed. A stranger walking into a barbershop in a neighborhood like this could be anyone, but the wariness that settled over the room was specific. It was the wariness of men who had learned through painful experience that an unfamiliar face could mean trouble. Darren Rucker stood behind the second chair with a pair of clippers in his hand, paused mid-cut. He was 50 years old now, broad-shouldered with gray spreading through his close-cropped hair and a deep scar above his left eyebrow that had not been in the photograph from 8 years ago. His eyes were dark and guarded. Solomon introduced himself. He gave his full name and his rank. He said he was the new captain of the Granton Police Department. He said he had come to talk about what happened to Rucker 8 years ago. The room tightened. The two men in the waiting chairs shifted uncomfortably. The man in Rucker's barber chair kept his eyes straight ahead at the mirror. Rucker set his clippers down on the counter. He told Solomon to leave. His voice was flat and final. He said he did not talk to police. He said no good had ever come from a black man in this neighborhood talking to a cop, and no badge, no rank, and no title was going to change that. Solomon did not argue. He did not pull rank. He asked for 5 minutes. Rucker told him he had 2. Solomon sat down in the empty third barber chair and began talking. He described what happened to him at the gas station 2 days earlier. He described the patrol cars blocking his vehicle. He described Lockhart approaching him and demanding identification. He described the fabricated robbery suspect story. He described the illegal search of his rental car. He described the handcuffs. He described being forced to his knees on the hot asphalt. And then he described what Lockhart whispered in his ear as he walked Solomon to the patrol car. He repeated the racial slur. He repeated it in the exact tone Lockhart had used, quiet and casual and venomous. The shop went completely silent. Even the television seemed to go mute, though no one had touched the remote. Rucker's hands, which had been resting on the back of the barber chair, slowly curled into fists. His jaw worked back and forth. His eyes, which had been guarded and distant, changed. The guard dropped. What replaced it was recognition. And beneath the recognition was something that looked very much like old, scarred-over pain being touched for the first time in years. Rucker said, in a voice so quiet that Solomon had to lean forward to hear it, that Solomon had just described exactly what happened to him, almost word for word. The same parking lot stop, the same robbery suspect lie, the same refusal to check identification, the same handcuffs, the same whisper. Rucker started talking and did not stop for 45 minutes. He told Solomon about the protection racket. He explained how it worked with the precision of a man who had studied his own oppression, the way a prisoner studies the walls of his cell. Lockhart and his crew had been operating a shakedown on black-owned businesses throughout the East Side for years. The terms were simple and non-negotiable. Every business owner paid a monthly cash amount, ranging from $200 to $500 depending on the size of the business. In return, the officers provided protection. But the protection was not from criminals. The protection was from the officers themselves. Business owners who paid were left alone. Those who refused faced an escalating campaign of harassment. Constant patrol car presence outside their storefronts, traffic stops of their customers, fraudulent citations for building code violations and health department issues triggered by anonymous complaints that always traced back to the same small group of officers. And if the business owner continued to resist, the harassment escalated to arrest, a fabricated charge, a planted item, an overnight stay in a holding cell, and a beating that the reports would later describe as the suspect resisting arrest. Rucker was one of the few who refused to pay. That is why Lockhart beat him. That is why he was arrested on a weapons charge that was later dropped when no weapon was ever produced. And that is why, after the charges were dismissed and Rucker came home with a swollen face and a broken rib, every other business owner on the block started paying. Rucker walked to the back of the shop, unlocked a drawer beneath the cash register, and pulled out a thick manila folder held together with 2 rubber bands. Inside were records he had kept for years, dates of payments he had confirmed with other business owners, amounts, names of the officers who collected, names of the businesses that paid, receipts that some owners kept as their own insurance. He handed the folder to Solomon. Solomon took it with both hands and held it for a moment before speaking. He told Rucker that what he had just given him, combined with what Solomon had already gathered from the department's internal files and from Lieutenant Hendry's investigation, was enough to bring the entire operation down. He told Rucker that the days of Lockhart running this neighborhood were ending. Rucker looked at him with an expression that mixed hope with deep, stubborn skepticism. He said he had heard promises from authorities before. Solomon said he understood that. He said the difference this time was that the person making the promise had knelt on the same asphalt, worn the same handcuffs, and heard the same word whispered in his ear. He said this was not abstract for him. It was personal. While Solomon was building alliances on the east side, Lockhart was building his own. That same evening, Lockhart drove to a large colonial-style home on Granton's west side, 3 miles and an entire world away from the east side. The home belonged to Franklin Parrish, the 62-year-old city council president. Parrish had held his seat for 16 years. He was old guard, old money, and old temperament. He had publicly opposed Solomon's appointment from the day it was announced, calling it politically motivated and reckless during a council session that was covered by the local newspaper. He described the decision to hire an outsider as an insult to the officers who had served Granton their entire careers. He never said the word race. He did not need to. Everyone understood what he meant. Lockhart sat in Parrish's wood-paneled study and made his case. He said Solomon was unstable. He said Solomon was conducting a witch hunt against good officers based on a personal grudge. He said the department would collapse under Solomon's leadership, and that officer morale was already destroyed. He said the union was considering a full work action. Parrish listened, nodding slowly, his fingers steepled beneath his chin. When Lockhart finished, Parrish picked up his phone and called Chief Oakes. He told Oakes he was scheduling an emergency meeting with the full council to discuss the viability of the new captain's appointment. He suggested that perhaps a reconsideration was in order. That evening, Solomon arrived home late. The house was a rented 3-bedroom on a quiet street that straddled the line between the east and west sides of Granton. Camille was sitting at the kitchen table when he walked in. She was not the kind of woman who frightened easily. She had spent her career standing in courtrooms arguing against police departments, corporations, and government agencies. She had received threats before. She had been followed before. But tonight her hands were clasped tightly together on the table, and when she spoke, her voice carried a careful, measured quality that Solomon recognized immediately. It was the voice she used when she was controlling fear. She told him that after leaving the grocery store that afternoon, she noticed a dark-colored sedan appear behind her as she pulled onto the main road. It followed her through 4 turns over 6 blocks, always maintaining exactly 2 car lengths of distance. When she pulled into their driveway, the sedan slowed at the end of the block, stopped for approximately 10 seconds, and then drove away. Solomon went to the living room and pulled up the footage from the home security camera he had installed the day they moved in. The camera captured a partial image of the vehicle. The resolution was not perfect, but the shape and profile were unmistakable. It was a Ford Crown Victoria, dark blue or black, with a spotlight mount on the driver's side pillar and municipal exempt plates that were not quite readable in the footage. Solomon recognized the make and model immediately. It was from the Granton Police Department's unmarked motor pool. They had followed his wife. The message was clear. The threat was no longer confined to the department. It was no longer professional. It had crossed the line into Solomon's home, onto his street, and into the life of the person he loved most. The war had become personal. Solomon spent the next 72 hours executing a plan he had begun forming the moment he saw the Crown Victoria on his security footage. He contacted the FBI field office 112 miles east of Granton. He had a relationship with a supervisory special agent named Keith Gorham, a man he had worked alongside during a joint task force investigation into a drug trafficking network that operated across the Carolina border 3 years earlier. Gorham was methodical, thorough, and had a particular interest in civil rights cases involving law enforcement corruption. Solomon drove to the field office on a Thursday morning and sat across from Gorham in a windowless conference room. He laid everything out in chronological order. He began with his own experience at the gas station, including every procedural violation and every word spoken to him. He presented the department's decade-long record of buried complaints, itemized and cross-referenced with officer names. He presented Nora Hendry's secret file with its witness statements, medical records, and documented timeline. He presented Darren Rucker's records proving the existence and mechanics of the protection racket. He presented the security camera footage of the unmarked department vehicle following Camille. He presented the anonymous threat note found on his desk. Gorham reviewed the materials for 2 hours, asking occasional questions and taking notes in a small leather-bound book. When he finished, he looked at Solomon and said that what he was describing was not a personnel problem. It was a criminal enterprise operating under the protection of a badge. The FBI opened a preliminary civil rights investigation into the Granton Police Department that afternoon. But federal investigations are deliberate by design. They move slowly, carefully, building cases that can withstand the scrutiny of federal court and the aggressive defense attorneys that police unions retain. Solomon had to hold the line inside the department while the FBI built its case, and Lockhart was making that task more difficult by the hour. Lockhart transformed himself from a suspect into a cause. He reframed the entire conflict as a battle between loyalty and betrayal, between the brotherhood of officers who had served Granton for years and an outsider who had been parachuted in by politicians to punish them. He held court in the break room, in the locker room, in the parking lot before and after shifts. He appealed to pride, to tradition, to the fear that every officer carried beneath their uniform, the fear that one day the department would turn on its own. Within 6 days of being placed on desk duty, Lockhart had circulated a formal letter of no confidence in Captain Solomon Kearney. Nearly half the department signed it. 43 officers put their names on a document stating that they had no faith in their commanding officer's judgment, competence, or fitness for leadership. The police union amplified the message. The union president held a press conference outside the station and described Solomon's internal review as a politically motivated attack on good officers. He warned that continued harassment of department personnel would result in a coordinated work slowdown that would leave Granton without adequate police coverage. Franklin Parrish escalated on the political front simultaneously. He scheduled a press conference of his own on the marble steps of City Hall, standing behind a podium with the Granton City seal, flanked by 2 sympathetic council members. Parrish questioned Solomon's qualifications, his motives, and his emotional stability. He called Solomon an outside agitator, a phrase so loaded with historical meaning, so deeply rooted in the language used to dismiss civil rights leaders throughout the 20th century, that its use sent a shock through every black resident watching the broadcast. The local news station ran the clip on a loop for 3 days. Opinion pieces appeared in the Granton Herald. Letters to the editor ran 2-to-1 against Solomon. Social media accounts that had been dormant for months suddenly activated with coordinated attacks on the new captain. Someone leaked Solomon's Charlotte personnel file to a local blogger who published selective excerpts designed to suggest a pattern of insubordination. The excerpts were taken out of context. The full file showed nothing of the kind. But context does not travel well on the internet, and the damage was done. Solomon was being compressed from every direction. From below by Lockhart's loyalists within the ranks. From above by Parrish's political machinery. From the shadows by whoever sent the threat and whoever followed Camille. Chief Oakes requested a private meeting. They sat in Oakes's office with the door closed and the blinds drawn. Oakes told Solomon he still supported him. He said he believed in the reforms. He said he understood the necessity. But his voice carried a hesitation that had not been there before. He said the political pressure from Parrish and the council was severe. He said there were whispers about a special session to reconsider the appointment. He said the union's threat of a work slowdown was real, and that the city could not afford to lose patrol coverage heading into the fall. He said he might not be able to protect Solomon much longer. Solomon looked him in the eye without blinking. He asked Oakes for 2 weeks. 14 days. He said that in 14 days, the situation would be resolved one way or another. Oakes studied Solomon's face for a long time. Then he nodded slowly and said he would hold the line for 2 weeks. But his expression said clearly that he was not sure he could. 3 days later, Solomon received a phone call that changed the trajectory of everything. It came in the evening, after 9 o'clock, from a number Solomon did not recognize. The caller was Jaden Stokes, the 16-year-old who had filmed the gas station confrontation from across the street. Jaden's voice was tight with fear. He spoke quickly, the words tumbling over each other as if he was afraid that if he stopped talking, he would lose the courage to say what he needed to say. He told Solomon that 2 officers had come to his mother's house the previous evening. They were not in uniform. They knocked on the door and identified themselves as Granton PD. They told Jaden's mother, a woman named Rochelle who worked double shifts at a packaging plant to keep her son in school, that her son was under investigation for interfering with an active police operation. They said the charge could be a felony. They said it could affect his college prospects, his future employment, everything. Then they told her that the situation could go away if Jaden deleted the video he recorded at the gas station. Rochelle was terrified. When the officers left, she begged Jaden to delete it. She cried. She told him she could not lose him to the system the way she had watched other mothers in the neighborhood lose their sons. But Jaden did not delete the video. 2 weeks earlier, the same afternoon he recorded it, he had backed the file up to a cloud storage account that his mother did not know about. The original was on his phone. The copy was in the cloud. He told Solomon he wanted to give him the video. He said he was scared, but was not going to let them make this disappear. Then Jaden said there was something else, something he had not noticed until he watched the video again the previous night with headphones on. His phone's microphone, a high-quality microphone on a phone he had saved 8 months of lawn mowing money to buy, had picked up audio from across the parking lot. In that audio, captured during the moments when Lockhart was walking Solomon toward the patrol car, Lockhart's voice was clearly audible. The words were distinct and unmistakable. Lockhart used the same vicious racial slur that Solomon had filed in his memory. And then Lockhart said something else that Solomon had not heard at the time, because it was spoken after Lockhart had moved a few steps ahead of him. Lockhart's voice on the recording said, clearly and without ambiguity, "We are going to teach this boy what happens when black men do not show respect to the badge." The audio was crisp. It was devastating. And in a federal courtroom, it would be admissible. Solomon built the final stage of his strategy with the precision of a man assembling a clock, each piece positioned so that when the mechanism engaged, Every gear would turn exactly as designed. Working in direct coordination with FBI Supervisory Special Agent Keith Gorham and Lieutenant Nora Hendry, he devised a sting operation targeting the protection racket. The design was straightforward. A federal undercover agent, a black man in his mid-30s with a background in organized crime investigations, would pose as a new business owner opening a restaurant on the east side of Granton. The agent rented a vacant commercial space on the same block as Rucker's barbershop. He put up signage. He arranged construction materials visible through the front window. He submitted permit applications to the city that would automatically generate records accessible to anyone in the municipal system, including police officers who routinely monitored new business filings in the neighborhoods they patrolled. Then he waited. The operation produced results in 5 days. On the 5th morning, a Granton PD patrol car parked across the street from the new restaurant space and sat there for 40 minutes. The following afternoon, Officers Fenwick and Dempsey walked through the front door. They were not in uniform. They wore plain clothes and carried no visible department identification. They introduced themselves by first name only. They told the undercover agent that opening a business on the east side was a smart investment. But that smart businessmen in this neighborhood understood the importance of maintaining good relationships with local law enforcement. They said that for a monthly contribution of $400 in cash, the new restaurant would receive priority attention from patrol units, faster response times to any calls, and a general understanding that the business would be left to operate without unnecessary complications. They did not explicitly say what would happen if the payment was refused. They did not need to. The implication was woven into every carefully chosen word. The entire conversation was captured by concealed audio and video recording equipment installed in the space by the FBI technical team. GPS tracking data confirmed the movements of both officers to and from the location. A second visit occurred 2 days later. This time it was Officer Clayton Peck who arrived, alone, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a small brown paper bag. He told the undercover agent that he was there to collect the first monthly installment. The agent handed over $400 in marked federal bills. Peck counted the money, placed it in the paper bag, and left. The transaction was recorded from 3 separate camera angles. The serial numbers on the bills were logged. Peck's vehicle was tracked by GPS from the restaurant to a storage unit on the outskirts of Granton, where the cash was consolidated before being distributed. Solomon now held every piece. The architecture of the case was complete. He requested a closed-door meeting with Chief Oakes at the station. In that room, with the door locked and the window blinds closed, Solomon presented the evidence in a systematic order designed to build from foundation to conclusion. First, he laid out the department's 10-year history of buried complaints, itemized, categorized, and cross-referenced with the officers responsible. Second, he presented Nora Hendry's file, built in secret over 3 years, documenting specific incidents of brutality supported by witness statements and medical evidence. Third, he placed Darren Rucker's records on the desk, proving the existence, duration, and financial structure of the protection racket. Fourth, he played the gas station video from Jaden Stokes' phone, including the full audio recording in which Lockhart's racial slur and explicit statement of intent were captured with devastating clarity. Fifth, he presented the evidence of witness intimidation against Jaden Stokes and his family, including the names of the 2 officers who visited Rochelle Stokes' home. Sixth, he showed the security footage proving that an unmarked department vehicle from the Granton PD motor pool was used to follow and intimidate the captain's wife. Seventh, he played the sting operation recordings, including the concealed video of Fenwick and Dempsey delivering the extortion terms and the recorded transaction of Peck collecting the marked federal bills. Oakes sat behind his desk and did not move for a long time after Solomon finished the presentation. The chief's face had aged visibly over the past 2 weeks. The lines around his eyes were deeper. The gray in his mustache seemed to have spread. He stared at the evidence laid out before him, and Solomon could see the weight of it pressing down on him. The understanding that the department he had led for 7 years was not merely flawed, but fundamentally corrupted at its core. Then Oakes looked up and authorized immediate action. The FBI moved on Solomon's signal. It happened during the afternoon shift change, at 3:45, when the maximum number of officers were present in the building for the overlap between day and evening shifts. 2 unmarked federal vehicles pulled into the station parking lot. 6 FBI agents entered through the main doors alongside Solomon and Nora Hendry. They carried federal arrest warrants signed by a United States District Court judge. Lockhart was in the break room, sitting at a table with a cup of coffee and a copy of the Union newsletter. He saw the agents walk through the door. He saw their tactical vests with the yellow FBI letters across the chest. He saw Solomon standing behind them. And in that moment, the thing that crossed Lockhart's face was not surprise. It was recognition. The recognition of a man who has always known, somewhere deep in the back of his mind, that this day was coming. He did not run. He did not reach for his weapon. He did not speak. He sat in the plastic chair with his coffee growing cold in his hand, while a federal agent placed him in handcuffs and read him his rights. Fenwick was arrested at his desk in the squad room, where he had been filling out a routine patrol report as if it were any other Tuesday. Dempsey was arrested in the locker room, halfway through changing into his civilian clothes, one arm still inside the sleeve of his uniform shirt. Peck was arrested in the parking lot, sitting in his patrol car with the engine running and his phone in his hand. He had been texting. The phone showed a half-finished message to Lockhart that read, "Something is happening at the..." He never finished the sentence. Sharp was not among those arrested. 2 nights before the operation, at 9:30 in the evening, Colton Sharp had come to Solomon's office. He knocked quietly and waited until Solomon opened the door. He was shaking. His face was the color of paste. He sat in the chair across from Solomon's desk and put his hands flat on his knees to stop them from trembling. He said he could not carry this anymore. He said he was 25 years old. He said he had a daughter who was 3. He said he followed Lockhart because he was terrified of what would happen to him if he did not. He said he had watched things that kept him awake at night. He said he had done things that he could not undo. And then he asked Solomon if it was too late. Solomon studied the young officer's face for a long time. He saw the fear. He saw the shame. And beneath both, he saw something that he recognized because he had spent his career looking for it. He saw the possibility of a man who wanted to be different from what he had become. Solomon told him it was not too late. Sharp provided a full written statement that evening. It ran 22 pages. He detailed every incident he had witnessed, every order Lockhart had given, every payment he had seen collected, every complaint he knew had been buried. His testimony confirmed every piece of evidence Solomon had gathered and added details that filled gaps the investigation had not yet reached. Franklin Parrish's arrest happened separately. FBI agents arrived at his colonial home on the west side of Granton at 7:15 that same evening. The financial records, obtained through a federal subpoena of banking records and cross-referenced with the cash flow documented by Rucker and corroborated by the sting operation, showed a clear pattern. Parrish had received regular cash payments, funneled through an intermediary, a cousin who operated a property management company that served as a pass-through for laundered funds. In exchange for these payments, Parrish had used his position as city council president to shield Lockhart and his crew from oversight, block reform proposals, prevent the hiring of outside investigators, and apply political pressure against anyone who threatened the operation. Parrish was arrested at his front door. He was handcuffed, he was read his rights, and he was led to a waiting federal vehicle in full view of his neighbors, who stood on their porches and their manicured lawns watching the most powerful politician in Granton placed into the back of a government sedan. As Lockhart was escorted through the main hallway of the station in handcuffs, he passed through the exact corridor where he had paraded Solomon in handcuffs just 2 weeks before. Every officer in the building was watching. The hallway was lined on both sides. Patrol officers, detectives, dispatchers, administrative staff, everyone. Lockhart stopped directly in front of Solomon. The two men were separated by less than 3 feet. Their eyes met. Lockhart's face was rigid, his jaw set, his eyes burning with a fury that had no outlet and no recourse. He did not apologize. He did not lower his head. He did not show remorse. Instead, he leaned forward and spoke in a voice loud enough for every person in that hallway to hear. He said Solomon would never last. He said this city would eat him alive. He said a black man would never truly run this department. He said it with the absolute conviction of a man who believed, even in handcuffs, even under arrest, even with his career and his freedom crumbling around him, that the world he had built was the natural order and that Solomon's authority was a temporary aberration that would eventually correct itself. Solomon looked at him. The same unshakable calm that had carried Solomon through every moment of this ordeal, from the gas station asphalt to the handcuffs to the whispered slur to the anonymous threats, held steady. Solomon said nothing, not one word. He did not need to, because every officer in that hallway heard what Lockhart just said, and every single one of them watched Lockhart being led out of the building in the same handcuffs he had used on their captain. The silence Solomon held in that moment was louder than anything he could have said. The aftermath moved with a speed that surprised even Solomon. The gas station video, released by the FBI as part of the public record following the federal indictments, reached the internet within hours. By the end of the first day, it had been viewed over 4 million times. By the end of the first week, that number exceeded 35 million. The footage showed a black man being forced to his knees on a gas station parking lot by 5 officers who had no idea he was their incoming commanding officer. The audio, enhanced and isolated by FBI technicians, captured Lockhart's racial slur with sickening clarity and his declaration of intent that they were going to teach this man what happens when black men do not show respect to the badge, played on every national news network in the country. Granton became a name that the entire nation knew. It was spoken by news anchors and senators and activists and pastors. It appeared in headlines across every major newspaper and on the front page of news websites around the world. Congressional committees cited it. Civil rights organizations referenced it. Law professors used it in lectures about systemic racism in policing. Solomon was invited to testify before a congressional subcommittee on police reform. Major media outlets requested interviews. Documentary producers reached out. Speaking invitations arrived from universities, advocacy organizations, and national conferences. Solomon declined nearly all of it. He gave one interview to a national correspondent, a 12-minute conversation in which he spoke calmly about systemic failure, institutional accountability, and the human cost of unchecked power. And then he went back to work. Because Solomon did not come to Granton to become a symbol. He came to do a job. He stayed in Granton, and he did the job. Over the following 6 months, Solomon implemented reforms that reshaped the Granton Police Department from its foundation. He established mandatory de-escalation training for every officer, 40 hours of instruction, followed by quarterly recertification. He implemented a body camera program with a critical difference from most departments. The cameras had no officer-controlled off switch. They activated automatically when an officer exited a patrol vehicle and recorded continuously until the officer returned. He created a civilian review board with genuine authority, not the advisory boards that existed in most cities with no power to compel testimony or recommend discipline, but a board with subpoena authority, access to internal records, and the ability to recommend termination. He built a transparent complaint tracking system that was accessible to the public. Every complaint filed was logged, assigned a case number, investigated within 30 days, and resolved with a written finding. The days of one-line dismissals were over. He launched community policing initiatives designed not by consultants or politicians, but by the residents of the East Side themselves. He held meetings in church basements and community centers and barbershops, and he sat and listened for hours while the people who had been most harmed by the department told him what they needed. They needed officers who walked the blocks and knew the names of the kids playing on the sidewalk. They needed response times that did not depend on the color of the neighborhood. They needed to believe that calling the police would bring help, not danger. Solomon built those programs with their input at the center of every decision. He personally recruited 12 new officers over the following months. 7 of them were Black. 3 were Latino. 2 were women. Each one was selected not only for their qualifications, but for their demonstrated commitment to community service. Each one was told on their first day that they were not joining a department. They were joining a mission. He visited every Black-owned business on the East Side that had been extorted by Lockhart's operation. He sat with each owner individually, explained the federal restitution process, and helped them file claims for every dollar they had been forced to pay. Some of those business owners had been paying for 5 years or more. Some had nearly gone bankrupt under the weight of the payments, while simultaneously running their businesses without the protection they were promised. Solomon made sure every claim was filed correctly, and every owner received the support they needed to navigate the federal system. Darren Rucker, the barber who had refused to pay and was beaten for his defiance, who had kept meticulous records in a locked drawer for years when no one in authority would listen, was appointed as the department's first community liaison officer. It was a new position that Solomon created specifically because he understood that trust between the department and the East Side community could not be built by officers alone. It needed someone the community already trusted, someone who had suffered and survived, and never stopped believing that accountability was possible. Rucker's barbershop became an unofficial gathering place where residents and officers met outside the context of enforcement. Coffee was shared. Conversations happened. Relationships formed that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Nora Hendry was promoted to assistant captain, the second highest-ranking officer in the Granton Police Department. She and Solomon worked together to rebuild the Internal Affairs Division from the hollowed-out, deliberately weakened unit it had been into a functioning, independent investigative body for the first time in the department's history. Officers who filed complaints were protected from retaliation. Investigations were conducted with professional rigor. The culture of silence that had allowed Lockhart and his crew to operate for over a decade was dismantled one policy at a time. Jaden Stokes, the 16-year-old who stood in a laundromat parking lot and held his phone steady while grown men in uniforms tried to intimidate him into silence, received a Community Courage Award at a ceremony held at Granton City Hall. The mayor presented a proclamation. Community leaders spoke. Solomon stood at the podium and addressed the room. He said that a teenager with a cell phone and a conscience had done more for justice in Granton than the entire police department had managed in a decade. He said that Jaden's bravery was not the kind that comes from not being afraid. It was the kind that comes from being afraid and standing firm anyway. He said the city owed Jaden a debt that could not be repaid with a plaque or a certificate. It could only be repaid by building a department worthy of his courage. Lockhart, Fenwick, Dempsey, and Peck were indicted on federal civil rights charges, extortion, conspiracy, and obstruction of justice. Franklin Parrish was indicted separately on corruption charges including bribery, money laundering, and abuse of public office. Their trials were scheduled in federal court. Their bail was set high enough to make a statement. The message traveled through every level of Granton's power structure. No badge and no office would protect those who used their authority to prey on the people they were sworn to serve. 6 months after Solomon took command, the numbers began to tell their own story. Reported crime on the East Side decreased by 18%. Emergency response times improved by an average of 4 minutes. Community trust surveys, conducted independently by a university research team, showed an improvement in resident confidence in the police department that the researchers described as unprecedented in their experience. Officers who had signed the no-confidence letter 6 months earlier now followed Solomon's lead without complaint. Not because they were ordered to, not because they were afraid, because they watched a man take a department that was broken and poisoned and begin to make it something worth believing in. They watched him absorb humiliation without losing his composure, face threats without retreating, and hold power without using it as a weapon. They watched him kneel on hot asphalt in handcuffs and rise to command the same building where he was paraded as a suspect. And in watching, something shifted in them. Not all of them, but enough. The closing scene happened on a Tuesday evening in early spring. Solomon was alone in his office. The station was quiet, that particular quiet that settles over a building between shifts when the day's urgency has faded and the night's work has not yet begun. The window behind his desk was open, and a mild breeze carried the smell of jasmine from the landscaping outside. Camille appeared in the doorway. She was carrying a small framed photograph, about 5 inches by 7 inches, in a simple black frame. She walked behind his desk without a word and hung the photograph on the wall, centering it carefully at eye level directly behind his chair, so that it was the first thing anyone would see when they sat across from the captain. It was a photograph of Isaiah Kearney, Solomon's older brother, 20 years old in the picture. He was wearing a white t-shirt and smiling, a wide, easy, unguarded smile. The kind of smile that belongs to a person who does not know that he has less than a year to live. The kind of smile that stops time. Solomon sat in his chair and looked at the photograph for a long time. Camille stood behind him with her hand on his shoulder. The room was quiet. Then Solomon spoke. His voice was low and steady, and he did not turn away from the photograph. He said that everything he does behind this desk is for Isaiah. He said his brother never received justice. No officer was held accountable. No investigation produced consequences. No apology was ever offered. No explanation was ever given that could make a mother stop wondering why her son died 7 minutes from home because a taillight was out. But Solomon said that every person he protects from this position, every complaint he investigates with the seriousness it deserves, every corrupt officer he removes from the streets, every community he helps rebuild, every young man like Jaden Stokes who is told that his courage matters, is Isaiah's legacy living forward. It does not bring Isaiah back. Nothing brings him back. But it means his life continues to shape the world through every act of justice his brother fights for. Solomon put on his captain's jacket. He adjusted his badge. He straightened his shoulders. He walked out of his office and into the main floor of the station for the evening briefing. As he entered the room, every officer present stood. Not because it was required by regulation, not because they were ordered to, not because someone shouted attention. They stood because they had watched this man endure what would have broken most people and emerge without bitterness, without vengeance, without the corruption of spirit that power so often brings. They stood because for the first time in the history of the Granton Police Department, the badge on every chest in that room meant the same thing: protection for everyone, regardless of the color of their skin. Solomon nodded. He took his place at the front of the room. He opened the briefing folder, and the work continued. Now a question worth thinking about. If Solomon had reacted with anger at that gas station, if he had shouted, resisted, or fought back in that moment of humiliation, the outcome of this story would have been entirely different. So consider this. When you witness injustice, whether it happens to you or to someone else, what is the most powerful way to respond? Is it always the loudest voice that changes the world, or is it sometimes the steadiest one? Share your answer in the comments. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you want to carry with you, leave a like so others can find it too. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story like this one. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who has ever been judged before they were known, someone who has ever been underestimated because of how they look, share this story with them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening all the way to the end. That matters more than you know. Stay strong, stay kind. And never forget that justice does not always arrive on schedule, but when it is built with patience and courage and an unbreakable belief in what is right, it arrives.